Sometimes I'm doing a massive ingestion. Maybe it's a zip file full of PDFs that somebody handed to me and I'm just getting into the archive. Or it's a collection from another site that I'm transferring in, making a mirror of, so that we can have all of these items another layer of protected. Naturally, I'm making my scripts work and following as the different files come alive, become readable, and inevitably, I browse through them. In that foggy moment of concentrating on things from an era, I sometimes find myself remembering how interested I was, how almost committed I was, that there was a healthy way for technology and people to coexist. It hasn't quite worked out that way, but I can still dream. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. When I worked at MIT for about 3/4 of a year, I was a receptionist in the physics department. This put me in the realm of being on the MIT campus quite a bit, and it was in this period of time that I was first learning about the World Wide Web as a potential technology. It's totally understood if people don't remember this, but computers before then would have a graphic aspect, but it was assumed that the online shared world could not have that. It was not going to be the case that if you are on one computer looking at another, that you could easily present a visual, audio, or maybe even a video experience with any sort of expectation of similarity. But the primarily text-based internet held its own jewels and treasures. For somebody who had come up through bulletin board systems with their often 10 or 20 megabyte collections, the machines that were on the internet felt like infinite storehouses, going from a basement or a shed into an aircraft hangar or a multi-story building, completely unable to fill anything near the space it had available. Probably the biggest examples would be the FTP sites, where you would just see endless amounts of old software, pictures you could download, programs you could run, and maybe you'd get a glance at the multi-gigabyte collection space that was waiting to be filled. It felt almost miraculous to know that out there, floating and accessible through these massive speeds, you could actually walk among all of this potential. There was a sense, I guess, that I was certainly full of, that if we just concentrated, if we kept tidy, if we stayed on top of things, we could have all of it available all the time. It's a weird dream to talk about now, but the idea of having a space accessible throughout the entire nation and being able to go to it and find everything that there was in a certain realm, whether it was demo scene or old Usenet posts or pieces of scientific or mathematical applications, and going to it and adding to it as new things became available, such that you knew you were going to find the new thing there, was a dawn, a sunrise of light and hope. We only think about this now when we run into outages or problems, but the amount of space, the amount of possible access that we now deal in dwarfs the early internet and absolutely crushes the bulletin board system world. in that ideal, before we actually had it universally available to high-speed connections to the home, I feel in my own heart that there was a hope and an ideal that what was going to come next was going to bring us to some sort of new level. I think of the fact that by the time textfiles.com arrives in 1998, browsers, in the sense that we think of them, these extremely general-purpose acquisition and presentation machines, are about 5 years old. There's browsers before then, but something in the aesthetic of the Netscape and Mosaic and other browsers felt different after 1993. And it was in that web of 1998 that I thought I could add my own little piece, my own little destination for memories that I was worried were going to disappear forever. The handcraftedness of web pages in that early time is, frankly, extremely lost now, something you don't encounter. There's good reasons for that. HTML is incredibly hard to deal with. CSS made it even worse. And then the embedding of languages, which I ironically make a big use of these days with emulation, have absolutely driven away the kind of experimenter and hardcore craftsperson that was showing up at that time. A limited color palette, rendered as fast as it could, is an interesting design limitation. And there are pieces of the late 1990s internet that really show that example. I feel like I'm 1,000 years old when I look at the fact that I remember the center tag, that I was there for the birth of the center tag, and I was not 100% on board. Form followed function, after all. It was intended in an idealized world that it wouldn't matter what machine you had or what it did, that we would have this unbelievably diverse ecosystem pumping into these shared protocols. And while you couldn't do insanely customized experiences, that small price to pay meant you knew you could get to the information quickly and cleanly. The introduction of the Common Gateway interface changed the internet. It turned these machines into something that was processing material and then presenting it to you. It wasn't static anymore. I feel some days that was a choice that could have been not made, that we could have had an internet that wasn't a constantly moving additional application pumped into our machines and eating up all the resources, leaving all sorts of potential for interoperability. This is what I mean by this haze of nostalgia. If I look back on the web, I can concoct all sorts of reasons why I think we lost something, why something we had was in our grasp, this near crystalline perfection of the balance between the online and offline world. Music that was performed live, presented in a simple manner for people who wanted to experience it later. Handmade graphics of lower bit levels, not photographic quality, but feeling in their own way like a work of art. Like the difference between a hastily scratched out sketch and a woodcut, or a piece of fine art transferred by hand. But stay with me. Let's think about it a little more. The early World Wide Web is an exercise in exclusivity. Even bulletin board systems, with their expense of having a home computer, at least in some ways, could be bought at a department store. Sure, you were paying as much as a washing machine or a television to be able to use bulletin board systems, and you were sacrificing a telephone line and paying 1980s dollars for a telephone line, but one could almost argue that there was a more generalized economic access there than the early internet and the early World Wide Web could ever hope to achieve. The barriers to entry, the colleges that could give you access, the businesses that paid thousands of dollars for anemic connections, the day-to-day staffing requirements and the constant maintenance and purchases ensured that only the most privileged, the most industrialized, militarized, scientific community-oriented groups could ever persist on that version of the web. In the modern era, I can go down to any store, buy a cheap cell phone for under $100, get a simple data-based plan, but also have Wi-Fi access by walking around any coffee shop or mall or even many office buildings, and then use the internet right there in my hands, portable and feeling almost free. That is where regular, normal, actual people were part of this process. So what I was really feeling, not so much a sense that there was an internet now lost, a place that is gone, but really that artificially soft cushion of homogeny and simplicity that comes when almost nobody can find their way into an exclusive club. When I put myself through these stacks of artifacts, these PDFs and written text files, I can be very much missing what I was feeling back then, and wish that, along with my love of the text and the fonts and the graphic style and lack of bit depth, that I was also 20 again. But that's not how life works. We grow, we expand, things change, people change, our attitude towards each other and the things that bother us end up becoming different, nuanced, perhaps less energetic, less life or death on every single moment or page. We can certainly point in a contemporary fashion towards unbelievable amounts of conflict and anger, but this to me is a growing pain. This is people realizing the world as it was online. And these are people for whom online access was denied for the first 20 or 30 years that it was fashioned. And that early world made assumptions about how people worked, about what sort of people would walk through the doors, and as a result, now these institutions, these frameworks, both invisible and visible, are being stressed to their limits. I don't think it's revolution on the net. I do think it's evolution. A person who never had to think about baud rates or dealing with calling areas or trying to make a card work within their PC compatible, trying to figure out how a CGI script wasn't providing the output when it was being connected to via a certain obscure browser type. They're not going to be expected to know every single layer moving down from their social media site to the wires. Nor should they. Instead, what I do as I exit this pile of memory and hopefulness and idealistic and, frankly, blinders-wearing community is realize that the fresh air, the salty smell, the waves of information that we have now is a liberation, a reflection of what there is. And I have no doubt that this will all become somebody else's beautiful, nostalgic, foggy memory of the greatest time of their online life. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It.